The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but some day the piecing together of disassociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. That short phrase from H.P. Lovecraft arguably is the quote which has inspired every world, every story, every project I have ever worked on, and is in many ways the inspiration behind many of my favorite elements in a lot of different narratives. The old gods of World of Warcraft, Shuma-Gorath from Marvel Comics, that horrifying three-cornered demon from Gravity Falls, they all invoke a certain otherworldly power and presence. And the eye is always the focal point. Just the gaze, this monster beyond time and space, looking at you intently. There's something really cool about that. I am also a fan of puzzle games. To be more specific, first-person puzzle games. Games like Portal and Don't Touch This Button. Games that give you a tool or basic guidance and then throw you some pieces and tell you, figure out how they come together, to define the puzzle and solve it. So I already knew the kind of game I wanted to make first, a first-person physics puzzle game with some eldritch elements and themes. I just needed to figure out the tool. What can the player do within this game world? Early on, I decided I wanted to do something with time, because time manipulation in games almost always results in, if nothing else, something interesting. And I could see a few instances where manipulating time would create some fun puzzle ideas. So I had to define exactly what I meant by manipulating time. Some games like Fable have things like slow time, where everything except the player slows down so the player can do more things to them before they can react. Other games like Dock Clock, the toasted sandwich of time, record what the player does and let you rewind your progress back to a certain point, kind of like a physics-based reset. I didn't really want to do either of those. I wanted a more object-specific type of time manipulation. For example, if I were to throw a cube, ignoring air resistance and friction, the primary variables which determine where it lands would be gravity and the force I exerted on the cube. Speed equals distance over time. Over X seconds, the box will travel Y distance before hitting the ground. Now, a second is a pretty specific measure of time in context of designing a mechanic like this, so let's use a moment. Every moment, something happens. Gravity is applied, force is calculated, movement occurs. In this example, every object's version of a moment is the same, and they behave as expected. All objects are following the world's local time. But what if we were to change what a moment means to another object? Say we took this box and halved what its moment was. So for every moment in the world, 2 moments occur in this box's perspective. If I threw it with the same amount of force as before, it would change its location twice before the gravity started affecting it once. In other words, from the perspective of the world, the object would move twice as fast as it should. If we did the opposite and extended the moment of the object to be twice that of the world, it would be affected by gravity twice as it only moved once. Or it would move slower, fall faster, and travel a shorter distance. Thinking in these terms helped me figure out what my tool would be. Localized temporal offsets. So with that in mind, the first thing I did was make a pretty simple player controller and just check off basic features. Can move the camera, can jump, can pick up items, can throw items, doesn't get stuck on slopes, can pause, and so on. Once I had something to work with, I built the framework for the temporal offset. I created a class that would be affected by the time power of the player, temporal objects, and made a few basic parameters and functionality that any children would get access to immediately. Then I had to think about exactly how I would visualize changing the time of an object, and I decided to split the gameplay into 2 primary modes. Normal, where time flows normally, and Frozen, where time is fully frozen. The textures of non-temporal objects are gray shifted, and temporal objects turn purple, because it stands out and I like purple. I made a reticle that would expand when hovered over a temporal object, and the player would use their movement bindings to shift the objects to be, from their perspective, slower or faster. Blue for slow, red for fast. At, let's say, maximum slowness, they are frozen in time. Maximum speed is a bit different, and I'll get into that at a different time, but generally it just makes them do what they do at whatever I define the object's maximum offset to be. Then I just create a child class called Dynamic Temporal Object to do a bit of the extra physics work, throw it on a cube, and any rigid body object can be affected by a localized time offset. From here, I spent a little time just thinking of objects that could have interesting time offset effects from the perspective of puzzle design. For example, if you have a floor button that opens a door when a cube is put on it, if you freeze the button in time, it would be unable to go back up when the box is removed. So the door would stay open and you could bring the cube with you into another room outside of the one it's in. Alternatively, you could freeze the button, grab the cube, throw it into the other room, and then unfreeze the button, soft locking yourself. I would have to build some kind of soft lock detection system so the player would know they trapped themselves and restart the level instead of just making them do it manually after who knows how long it takes for them to figure out they can't progress. It is around this time I also started figuring out who the player character would be. Originally I was thinking more of an insectoid character, but I ended up leaning more into skeletal monstrosity. Go figure. General Grievous is definitely the primary source of inspiration for the body shape and the cape. I thought it would be interesting to have one large extending arm inside the ribcage and using a huge raven skull for both the main head and those pseudo-pauldrons he has. I don't really have a lot of concept art to show of him at the moment since most of the planning stage for his design was on a whiteboard. Though, really, all my planning is on a whiteboard. And aside from some smaller details, the model is finished, so I don't really need to draw him anymore. It was around this time I came up with the name of this game, Trials of Nio. I will go into the story and lore of this project in a future video. So right now I am working on getting more of the temporal objects designed out and working, and thinking of ways they can interact with the player and each other. I will lean more heavily on the art, story, and lore side of things later on in development to add the eldritch themes that I want. If this seems like a project you would be interested in following, subscribe to the channel and follow it on Twitter for development-related updates. If you have questions related to this project or just in general, leave a comment and I might be able to provide further information. Also, I'm working on getting a Discord set up in the future for this and future projects I do, so keep an eye for an announcement related to that. That is it for now, and always remember, you cannot see the dark, but the dark can see you.